forward. These questions can be posed on the conference webpage or handwritten and given to the UOG students that will be coming around to collect when called upon. Are there any students in the room that can raise their hands? They're wearing the Choice Guam shirts, the black shirts. And once again, the webpage can be accessed by scanning the QR code located at each of your tables. If you're not that tech savvy, you can open up the camera on your phone and place it on the QR code and just select the QR code on your screen and it should pop up the webpage for you, okay? If you're having trouble scanning the code, you can type in choiceguam.org. And once the questions have been collected, they will be posed to the panel by our UOG students. We humbly ask for your patience and understanding in the event that we're unable to address all of the questions given due to time constraints. However, we highly encourage participation and feedback from all of you. Once the last presenter is finished, we kindly ask that you remain on stage while we invite the first two presenters back for questions and answers. Okay, our first speaker. Our first speaker is a representative from the Independence Task Force, Dr. Michael Bavakwa. Dr. Michael Bavakwa is an assistant professor in Chamorro Studies at the University of Guam and a member of Guam's Commission on Decolonization. His scholarly work deals with studying the impacts of colonization on the Chamorro people of Guam, as well as theorizing the possibilities for their decolonization. His academic work has appeared in the journals Marbles and Tales, Micronesian Educator, the Contemporary Pacific and American Quarterly. In 2015, he helped to found a creative company called the Guam Bus, which publishes comics and children's books that feature the Chamorro language and the retelling of Chamorro legends. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Michael Lujan Bavakwa.
Buenas and hafide to Wisconsin. I'm Michael Lujan Bavakwa. I'm happy to be here today talking to all of you on behalf of the group Independent Guam. And so this presentation is a little bit longer than the time that I've been given, so I'll try to rush through a couple pieces. But I am the co-chair for Independent Guam. My other co-chair, Victoria Lambero, is outside, and you can visit her booth for UOG Press, pick up some local literature. So what is Independent Guam? So Independent Guam, this is our mission statement. Empowers the Chamorro people to reclaim our sovereignty as a nation. Inspired by the strength of our ancestors and with love for future generations, we educate and unify all who call our island home to build a sustainable and prosperous independent future. Independent Guam is a community arm of the Independence for Guam Task Force, which is part of the Commission on Decolonization. And so, who is Independent Guam? In addition to me, who else is in Independent Guam? It's us, it's you, it's everybody. A lot of people are in Independent Guam, a lot of people follow Independent Guam. Over the past 3 years, we've had more than 1,000 people attend all of our different events that we've had. And so, this is a picture from one of our general assemblies. And you can see we've got our kids there, our members there. We have regular meetings, regular activities every month. These are some of the things that we do in the community. And so we have a general assembly. It's usually the last Thursday of every month at the Chamorro Village Main Pavilion. At the general assembly, we introduce an educational topic every month. So we talk about how an independent Guam can decrease corruption in the government. We talk about how an independent Guam can build small businesses, how an independent Guam can reform its criminal justice system. And for each assembly, we look at a different country and how they do those sorts of things. And the countries we usually pick are similar in size to Guam or have a similar history than Guam. Because one thing that we often forget, though, is that while we may feel that we are too small to do anything different, some of the richest countries in the world are the same size as Guam in terms of its population and in terms of its land area. And so the General Assembly the last Thursday of every month. We also do murals. If you look at the picture up there, that is from our last mural, which was at the Seti Bay Overlook. It's the Nalatla mural. If you look outside, somebody at our booth out there is actually wearing a t-shirt that we printed specially for that. We do podcasts, the Fanatsu podcast. We have a new podcast every week. We just filmed yesterday our 100th episode of the podcast. You can follow it on Instagram, or you can watch it live on Facebook. We have teach-ins where we deal with different topics. That's usually like a 90-minute presentation where you get really deep into sort of an issue. We've had teach-ins on the cockfighting ban, on Puerto Rico's plebiscite issues, on the Chamorro Land Trust, on the Organic Act, all sorts of stuff like that. We even have concerts, heritage hikes, and we participate in demonstrations around different issues important to the island. For example, when I mentioned concerts, we've had 3 annual concerts, the Nalatla Songs of Freedom. We have it every year on July 4th at the front field in Adelup. And this is one of our posters from our last concert held earlier this year. And some images from the concert. We had about 500 people show up this year, so it was very nice. Young, old, just a really great chance for people to engage in sort of imagining a different future for the island through art, through poetry, through song and dance. Now, this is a question that is often asked, though. Is independence bad for Guam? Out of the 3 political status options, independence usually has the hardest time being talked about because people fear that it is too radical, Guam is too small. There's all of these reasons that people often feel that independence is something that just can't work for Guam. And that's not really true. It may feel true, but it's not really true. Independence is a normal part of life. Independence is a vital part of life. Independence is very possible for Guam. If we look at other places that have been in similar situations to Guam over the past 100, 150 years, we find that territories have, in an overwhelming majority, always chosen to be independent rather than stay in their position or seek to be incorporated into their colonizer. And so The Guardian did this study on the eve of the Scottish referendum on independence, and basically said that in 50 votes for independence in the last 150 years, 88% of the time, independence was the chosen option for people that were asked what they wanted next for their future. And before we sort of think that independence is this scary, impossible thing, with cooperation of the United Nations, 3/4 of a billion people have become independent over the past, since World War II. More than 80 colonies have moved on to becoming independent. And even around the world today, you still have active independence movements where people are pushing for their self-determination. Some of these are new movements, some of them are old movements, some of them are based around economic issues, some of them are based around national identity. But if we look, West Papua is one which is gaining more attention. Bougainville just held their referendum very recently, and the overwhelming majority voted for independence. Catalonia has received a lot of attention in the EU. It's a very complicated situation there. Okinawa has a small but growing independence movement. And part of the reason that they have an independence movement is because the people there who were protesting the bases, a significant number of them feel that the only way they could reduce the bases is actually to change their political status. That as long as they are a prefecture of Japan, then the bases will always be part of Japan's relationship to the US. There has been a long-standing independence movement in Hawaii. Of course, Hawaii is a stolen kingdom. The US annexed it after people representing and from the US overthrew the kingdom in the 19th century. And then Scotland, this is an image from Scottish independence activists. They sort of defied a lot of conventional wisdom and became very close in their last referendum to achieving independence, to voting for independence. And with the talk of Brexit, there is a lot of possibility that they will have another referendum. And so if we look at the world around us, there's almost 200 independent countries in the world. The United Nations acknowledges 17 territories in the world. And so the weight of history is definitely moving in one direction. This is from FESPAC 2016. It was a very powerful moment here in Guam because Guam invited all of the peoples across the Pacific to come and visit and share in our history, our language, our culture. And at the closing ceremony, a group of delegates from Guam held up banners saying, "Decolonize Oceania, free Guahan," because most of the countries that participated are, of course, countries. They have achieved their independence. They fought for their independence. They are sort of making their way in the world, but a handful of places such as Guam participate in FESPAC but are still considered to be colonies. And so it's always important to remember that the Pacific has moved towards independence, moved towards integrating with each other, but Guam remains unfree. Guam remains isolated from the Pacific, whereas Guam could be a hub and a central part of the Pacific. So long as we're a territory, we are usually cut out of the Pacific. So this is something that we find a lot. Is seeking independence something that is taimamala? Is it ungrateful? Is it anti-American? Is it unpatriotic? And so these are things that I get called all the time, interestingly enough. Radical, definitely. Troublemaker, definitely. Hippie, definitely. Commie, definitely. Anti-American, absolutely. Racist, not in a while. When Dave Davis was writing his column, I used to get that all the time. Taimamala, absolutely. And so, if you push for independence, are you these things? Why do people feel that if you do, you are? And so it's always important to remember that throughout history, the most radical people are often the ones, the troublemakers, the people that don't get along with society and push for change, are oftentimes the ones that we end up celebrating as heroes and pioneers later. Because they stood for something against a system that was corrupt, against a system that was inhuman, against a system that needed to be changed. And so you can definitely, I would argue, count those who are pushing for decolonization as being those who are pushing in the name of justice for a better world. Because we should all agree that there shouldn't be colonies left in the world. Being a colony is something that colonies have been around for a long time, but slowly we've developed this idea that they shouldn't exist anymore. And so part of our place in this world, in this history, is that we should push to eradicate colonization from the world. And that we shouldn't accept it in our own lives. We shouldn't look at it in other places and say it's justified there. And so if that makes me or that makes you a radical or a troublemaker, we should embrace that label in the name of improving this world that we are a part of. This is okay. So what is wrong with Guam's status now? It's an important question to ask. What is wrong with Guam's status? Now, there's lots of ways that I could talk about this. It's a very interesting situation that we have here in Guam, because being a territory of the US in some ways gives us a level of comfort, a level of sort of modernity that is higher than other places in the Pacific. And so, but at the same time, we all have so many complaints and frustrations about the current system. There's so many issues in our government, in our economy, in our society. And one of the unfortunate things is that we don't connect political status to our frustrations with the society today. And so, former Governor Ricky Berdalio, one of the things that we should think about in understanding why the status quo has got to go. The Organic Act. In our school system, the kids learn about the Constitution. I always argue that they shouldn't learn just about the Constitution, because the Constitution doesn't necessarily directly apply to people in Guam. There are statutes, federal statutes such as the Organic Act, which make parts of the Constitution apply to Guam. But as we have seen somewhat recently, we may think, for example, that the right to vote is one of the most American things out there. People will tell you that. You'll be taught that in school. There's entire nonprofits which promote that idea every election year. But not if you listen to federal courts. and not if you listen to the federal government. Because the federal government has argued that for people in territories, they can absolutely deny you the right to vote, that it is not considered to be a bedrock part of the United States, and what makes it what it is. And so when we look at, when Berdali was talking about the Organic Act, it improved the status of people on Guam, but it also enhanced the authority of the United States over Guam. It gives us a feeling, sort of, that our problems have been solved, but in truth, they haven't. If we look at our island today, there's all of these decisions, there's all of these parts of the federal infrastructure which affect us, which determine the parameters of our existence. We don't teach ourselves about them. We instead teach ourselves the fiction that if you love America, if you're patriotic, then America reciprocates, not educating ourselves on what our true status is. And so this is the most important part of the Constitution that we should learn, is that Congress shall have powers to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. That is what applies to us, is that Congress has the authority to determine what can and cannot exist in the territories. And so if you think that your place in relation to the United States is just like somebody who lives in California, or Texas, or Hawaii, even if you serve in the US military, it doesn't. That's not the case. And one of the unfortunate things, sort of, there's a lot that I could say more about the status quo, but one thing that makes it very, very unfortunate is that we don't have the protections or the powers as a state that we would have, and we don't have the protections or the powers as an independent country that we would have. And so this is a poster that was made during sort of the military buildup comment period phase, about 10 years ago. And part of the reason it was created is because as a territory, the federal government does have a lot more power in the island than it would in a state. And the federal government does have a lot more ordinary, regular power than it would in an independent country. And so I can talk, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I can talk more about it in Q&A. So this is one thing that people often feel. If Guam became independent, would the US just leave? People say, is that don't bite the hand that feeds you, because then the hand won't want to feed you anymore. Don't say, what's it called, don't kick America out, because then America's not going to want to help you, blah, 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 stuff like that. Makes it sound very high school. And so one of the things that we should consider, though, when thinking about that, is the idea of the sacred trust that an administrating power has over its territories. And the sacred trust comes, it is something that all countries who sign the UN Charter are bound to. And different countries carry it out in different ways. But it is this idea that an administrating power will support a territory on its path to meaningful self-determination and self-governance. And so it requires that they put money into developing their territories. It requires that they put money into educating their territories about their future. And it also requires that they assist their territories in transitioning to that new future. And so it is this idea of the sacred trust, this transition period, is something that most colonizers have actually carried out, including the United States. So the United States had similar periods of transition. This is from Joe Bradley's report. I think Joe Bradley just walked in the room. I think I saw him. But so when the US has negotiated its status with the other islands around Micronesia, the Compacts of Free Association became part of the transition period to assist them. When the Philippines became independent, there was a 10-year Commonwealth period in which the US was supposed to assist the Philippines by giving them money and helping them develop a military and so on. And so the assumption would be that because the US, so one thing to consider for this is that becoming independent doesn't mean that you turn your back on the world. And it doesn't mean that you turn your back on the United States. In fact, I would argue that if you wanted to have a healthy relationship with the United States, you could probably have a healthier relationship as an independent country than you can as a sort of a Tsakman, sort of a territory on the side, which sometimes gets attention, sometimes doesn't get attention. Are we ready for independence? Ooh, you guys remember this one's from a couple of years ago, sort of the pay raise sort of issue. One of the things, and in the news more recently, we hear about government waste, government corruption. It's a constant thing in Guam. We hear about sort of government officials in the Marianas being indicted for certain things. And so the question always comes about, how can we be independent or become independent when we have so many problems? And I mean, for me, I don't want to get too much into it, but I always have to ask people, because we do have this feeling that there is this OOG quality to our problems, that Guam must be somehow the worst place in the world for all of these things, that Guam must be the most corrupt place in the world for all these things. And I always remember when Carlton Skinner came back to Guam in the year 2000, and he was asked that question. And if you remember about that time, there was a different governor in power then, and there was a cloud of scandal around him, around Governor Gutierrez. And he was asked, Carlton Skinner was asked, what do you think about Guam and how it's developed? Are you disappointed? Are you happy because of all the problems that Guam has? What do you think Guam is ready to move to another level of government? And Carlton Skinner responded, I see that Guam has problems, and Guam is being influenced in different ways, but I don't think that Guam's problems are any different than the problems we face in the United States. So at a time when there was immense scandal in the island, the father of the Organic Act said, no, your problems are just like the problems we face in the United States. The point is you got to figure out what to do about your problems and not just sit there and feel like you can't do anything about your problems. And so one of the things that we do in our General Assemblies every month is that we look into our history and we honor what we call a Magatauta, who is a notable individual, a notable person who has sort of worked to improve Guam, who has pushed for political status change, who has pushed sort of important reforms on the island, protected the Chamorro culture, protected resources. And we pick people from across the political status spectrum. And so we pick people, so if you look at the faces here, we've got Gloria Nelson, former Senator Gloria Nelson, former Lieutenant Governor Frank Blas, former Senator Paul Berdaliu, noted Tetsa, Magdalena Bazzani, OPIR's Ron Rivera, Tonko Regis from Moleso, who led a group of men in Moleso to fight and kill the Japanese in their village in the closing days of World War II. And so every month we honor them. We talk about what they have done, what they have contributed, and we ask ourselves to remember that we have the strength in us to do this. We have enough examples from today and from the past to show us that we can absolutely be independent, that there's enough sort of great figures in our history, strong figures, intelligent figures, creative figures, that we could absolutely take on the issue of decolonization. Okay, wait, 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, Spencer too. Okay, so one thing to think about, can we sustain ourselves? There is this idea that independence means isolation. It's a very common idea where we think about independence in the way that we think about being an independent person, right? That you pay for all your own things, you do all the things yourself, right? Can we survive on our own? And I always like quoting the late Senator Frank Lujan, who in many ways was ahead of his time on this issue, where he wrote in his article, those who defend Guam's colonial status argue that the economic independence of Guam is impractical. We happen to agree. Guam by herself can never be economically independent, but nor can our great mother country, the United States. There is no longer any such animal as an independent nation in the world today. All nations are economically interdependent. And so when we think about independence as being isolated, doing it all on our own, that's simply not the case. Even the United States is not, quote unquote, completely economically independent. No country is, and no country has to be.